From Fiji to Slovakia, from Gabon to Scotland, there are very few people on the planet working on financing regeneration at a landscape scale level. So I'm super happy to check in again with Paul Chatterton of the Landscape Finance Lab, who's currently working to finance the regeneration of 85 million hectares across 16 landscapes. Welcome to another episode of Investing in Regenerative Agriculture, Investing as if the planet mattered, a podcast show where I talk to the pioneers in the regenerative food and agriculture space to learn more on how to put our money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities and ecosystems while making an appropriate and fair return. Why my focus on soil and regeneration? Because so many of the pressing issues we face today have their roots in how we treat our land, grow our food and what we eat. And it's time that we as investors, big and small, and consumers start paying much more attention to the dirt/soil underneath our feet. In March last year, we launched our membership community to make it easy for fans to support our work. And so many of you have joined as a member. We've launched different types of benefits, exclusive content, Q&A webinars with former guests, Ask Me Anything sessions, plus so much more to come in the future. For more information on the different tiers, benefits and how to become a member, check gumroad.com/investinregenag or find the link below. Thank you. Welcome to another episode, today with Paul, the founder of the Landscape Finance Lab, which supports practitioners and investors to structure, launch and finance deals at a landscape scale. Welcome back, Paul.
Koen, it's great to be here. I think someone called you the Oprah Winfrey of regenerative agriculture finance. I think that's very true.
So be warned, no pressure.
Great to be with you.
have a seat on the couch and let's get deep into your soul. No, you were with us in June 2019, which feels like a few centuries ago. And obviously, then I will link the interview below so you can have a listen of what it was then, the Landscape Finance Lab. It has, I wouldn't say changed a lot, but shifted maybe a bit or nuanced differently. But for anybody that didn't listen to it then, and don't go and find the website now because we have Paul here who can introduce the Finance Lab in a few minutes. What would you say when somebody basically has no clue what you're doing, what the Finance Lab is, the Landscape Finance Lab, and how would you introduce it in a couple of minutes to someone that's completely new to the space?
So the Landscape Finance Lab was set up to help landscapes, people in landscapes, build a system that can draw down large finance, get large results, and do it in a way that suits them. That's our purpose. And we're a small team. There's only 10 of us from Brazil to Bali. We're having a lot of fun. And I think, starting to see some amazing results around the planet. And the future is extraordinary. What's happening right now is really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, because we've been talking about a landscape scale, I think especially in, let's say, conservation for a long time, but it seems to be, especially in our bubble, start to take off more and more. Do you still have that set of criteria we talked about last time? I think it was at least 1 million hectares, at least 1 million people involved in the landscape or around the landscape, and at least the finance need of $100 million. That was the big numbers just to say, okay, we're only looking at things at scale. Is that still the case, or have you adjusted those criteria?
And 1 million tons of CO2 emission reduction. And
1 million tons of carbon, yeah, of course. Yeah.
And 1 million tons of traded goods. No, that's still our criteria. That's what we look for. We will go under those numbers occasionally if there's a really powerful opportunity to present a model for change. But we're finding some enormous appetite for change at that scale in landscapes right across the world. Our biggest landscape, I think, is an 18 million hectare program on the corner between Cameroon, Republic of Congo, and Gabon, some of the richest rainforests on this planet, and the most important place for elephant migrations and lowland gorillas, as an example. But we've got some small but really powerful programs in say Scotland, 400,000 hectare landscape that has inside it twice the carbon content of all of the woodlands and forests of the United Kingdom combined. It's one area.
Wow. Okay, let's unpack those two. There must be other examples, but let's go from Gabon to Scotland. But in Gabon, is that the more traditional how to preserve the forest, or what makes it different in this case? What brings you into it compared to maybe the traditional conservation NGOs, etc.?
Yeah, we're working with the traditional conservation NGOs, WWF and Wildlife Conservation Society and so on. But the challenge for them and for us is to get much larger and longer term finance when you're trying to protect gorilla habitat or baka community land or whatever. You know, grant financing just doesn't cut it. It's short term, it's small scale, and you really can't make the change you need over a massive landscape like that. And you're also fighting against enormous financing for mines and railways and other. So how do you change the game? That's what we've been looking at. How do you use that power of commercial finance and some of the new carbon finance to get investment at the scale of 100 million and above into those landscapes for decades so that you can really make a difference?
And in this case, let's say in the region there, what's the angle for the investors to come in? Is that carbon? Is that sustainable logging? Is that ecotourism? Is it all of the above? Or what's the main hook that's different now compared to 10 years ago or 20 years ago when we also wanted to preserve those forests, but somehow didn't manage to find long-term finance and mostly relied on grants?
Been a few hooks. The cocoa industry is worried about being seen to be the destroyer of rainforests. So we've worked with Barry Callebaut, the world's largest cocoa trader, and now all of the cocoa actors in Cameroon to create a roadmap for deforestation-free cocoa and 3 landscapes where that can be rolled out. So that's one hook, and then another is the logging industry and carbon. There's a whole lot of carbon money coming. There's a $150 million investment in the Republic of Congo from the World Bank. So looking at how to bring that to the ground and protect some key wildlife corridors, but also make opportunities for the logging sector. We want, there's certain areas where they shouldn't be operating, but there's plenty of areas where forests can be restored and logging can happen. So building the industry as a whole. And I think that's the big difference when you start looking at this next level of scale. You can actually find synergies between different industries that in the past have been competitors. And that's where it gets really exciting.
And an example there, would it be cacao and the logging industry, or is it the carbon industry and the logging? Like, what is an exciting synergy you've seen or noticed?
Well, the synergy between the conservation industry and the logging industry, for instance, but certainly cacao and forestry, community forestry and commercial forestry. And then, you know, over time, there's the opportunity to bring in other agricultural players. The oil palm industry wants to operate in that area, but knows that it will be seen as very negative if it's destroying rainforest. How can it find the right land and work with communities to build its industry without damaging these very special habitats?
And then Scotland. What is exciting about Scotland? As it is a smaller landscape, you said 400,000 compared to the million, but it's a lot of carbon, so that's probably why it got an exception. Describe the landscape for anybody that hasn't been there. What do you see, and what then we'll go to what do we hope to see in 10 years or so?
Well, I went to the Glasgow COP climate conference, and that was exciting but a bit depressing. But then I had a chance to spend 3 days traveling around this landscape. It's right up in the very north, just near John O'Groats, and it's spectacular. You've got the highlands in the distance, and they drop down onto these long plains that are full of these beautiful peatlands and little valleys with forest in them, straths. And then that drops over wild sea cliffs into the ocean. You know, there's castles sitting on these cliffs. It's classic Scotland. It's really beautiful. But, you know, crazily, and this is our challenge, the UK created incentives for tree planting in the 1980s that planted trees all across this really important landscape and damaged the peatlands, damaged the carbon storage potential. And those plantations are not viable, well, not very viable. And now they're being pulled out. So Royal Society for the Protection of Birds has been digging up 22,000 hectares of these forests, including pulling the roots out of the trees.
Wow.
And restoring the peatland. It's massive. And that will be a really important storage for carbon for the UK, and I think a model for the rest of Europe and the temperate zone. This is the most concentrated carbon you get in the Northern Hemisphere, in the temperate zone.
It's in the peatlands.
The peatlands, yeah. So they're incredibly important. And they're very important for bird life and all sorts of other, for salmon rivers, for fishing industry, for hunters and so on. So making sure it works for everyone is what we're now looking at.
And so it sounds sort of counterintuitive, removing the trees to give space to peatlands, but it's removing the non-native, I'm imagining, or at least not where the tree should be. That's what you're saying, right?
That's exactly right. It's spruce that was just planted as an investment opportunity and had very little value for the local communities. So I think that's a challenge for when you do get a $100 million investment for landscapes, how to make sure that that's invested in a way that works for the communities, works for nature, works for the long term. And we're really working on methodologies that allow everyone to get together and plan out over that really, over many generations, what they want and how this is going to work.
And so how would that landscape look like? Like how does, you described a bit how it looks now. Would there be more like reforestation upstream to protect something? Like what would the fundamental change be besides taking out the trees and giving more space to the peatlands? What would that landscape look like in, let's say, 10 years, if you go back there compared to now?
Continuing the work that's happening already, removing the trees and tourism infrastructure and so on. But I think planting trees in the river valleys that had trees before, and these were rowans and birches and so on, planting more trees up on the edge of the highlands to make sure that the water flow continues through the peatland. The big danger is that peatlands across the world will dry up and become net emitters. And that's already happening in many parts of the world. So if we can keep these peatlands wet, they'll store the carbon forever. And then using the investment, the carbon finance that comes in to benefit the whole community and to build businesses, to invest in businesses. A big challenge is to bring the small people along with the big people. The danger with carbon finance is that the rich get richer, the landowners get richer, and everyone else suffers or comes along on their tails. So we're starting with the crofters, the small landowners, and working out solutions for them first, and then working our way up to the larger landowners and so on. And I think that's really important, that justice and fairness and looking after the smallest actors in the landscape is the first thing.
Because in Scotland, is that on land ownership, is there, I don't know the region, but just as in many places, it's relatively concentrated, like large landowners became larger over the last years as well as people moved away, etc. Is it quite concentrated? So the danger is the large ones anyway. I mean, access to these kind of finance and carbon finance, etc., is sometimes difficult and maybe doesn't make sense if you don't own so much. Is the land ownership relatively distributed or very concentrated in Scotland?
A little bit concentrated. 432 people own half of Scotland. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Astonishing. I've never seen anything like it anywhere. It's an incredibly class segregated society, and everyone has the Battle of Culloden still at the top of their minds. If you've watched Outlander, this battle in 1742 is still firmly remembered because the people who lived on the land were pushed off afterwards by the clearances, and that's still very present. So there's a few large landowners, lords, sheikhs, oligarchs, and now conservation organisations. And then a lot of small people who hold land holdings, towards the edges of the territory. So making sure that everyone grows together and, over time, building a fairer system is going to be really important.
And how would that sounds like some kind of redistribution of land, which is land ownership is a whole different discussion and rabbit hole, obviously. But some people we've interviewed, like Thomas Ripple and others, see the private land ownership as actually the key to regeneration or getting rid of private land ownership. What do you see when you say a fairer system? What do you envision there? How would that work?
Oh, I've got no idea. I'm not going to get involved in Scottish politics, but but what is being discussed is, obviously, if you own land, you're not going to give it up. But if there's pressure like that and inequalities like that, a lot of landowners are starting to think, well, what can I share? How can I share these benefits with others? And this is a question for the world of carbon.
I would say even you could give it up. I mean, in a sense, I see farmers in the UK or in Germany that have farmed organically, let's say for the last 30 years, are getting closer to their retirement, and Thomas Ripple can do a much better job at explaining it, but are getting closer to their retirement. All their money is and their wealth is in their land, but they don't want to sell to the highest bidder, even though they have amazing soils because they've been farming traditionally organic, let's say, for the last 30 years. And there is like, how do we figure out there is a transition needed there? Unless they sell to a developer or something, we lose that land and we lose that possibility. We lose the soil as well. And they are working on basically a pension scheme for these kind of farmers that that really have the intrinsic motivation to give other people access to that land, to give other people the opportunity to farm in a way that makes sense for the land and not be pressured by an enormous loan that they had to take out of the bank to buy this farmland. So they basically sit down with that farmer and say, okay, what do you need in terms of what do you need as a pension? What do you need as a bit of cash upfront to buy a piece of land somewhere, build a house and be fine? And then what do you need per month? And usually if you do that calculation, you get to a much lower amount compared to the land value. And of course, they have to promise when they buy the land from this farmer and have the farmer retire, is that the land will never be farmed conventionally, will never be sold, will never be speculated, and will be held in the commons, but will be probably farmed by 6 families or 5 compared to 1, which is also very interesting so the ownership changes, but the access suddenly becomes accessible for a number of different families to farm as regeneratively as possible and basically make a living of land, which probably is also the legacy that farmer wanted. So there are actually some owners that are starting to think in the same purpose discussions we have a lot with Purpose Ventures or the steward ownership, like what is that land and how can it live on forever, even if, because otherwise maybe your family gets involved at some point and starts cutting it up. And I mean, we all know the issues that can happen with that. So I think it's a very interesting, slow discussion, but the ownership discussion is very interesting because some people are willing to give up a very big check to make sure that the land will be stewarded in a better way.
I was talking to the head of the European Landowners Association, who represents the big and small landowners, and he was saying that the old farmers, some of them are gifting their land for conservation or for community purposes and so on, and that's fantastic. Young landowners are coming up, and many of them are thinking in a regenerative way and a generous way in working with their communities. They're seeing that it makes sense that you can grow your business by sharing the value of your land. You can grow it even more than trying to do it by yourself. And I think they're the sort of models that we're going to be testing. Can you get carbon finance in and have the local communities manage your land with you and really grow the value for the communities? Give them access to parts of your land, create tourism activities or small agricultural ventures that work with the communities and some of the innovators in the communities and draw young people back into those communities. I've got no idea what this is going to be in Scotland. We're only beginning.
And do you see that happening? Like, do you see the interest for young people? Because that's, I think, a topic that is close to anybody's heart. Like, how do we get this huge march towards the urban environments? How do we reverse that partly? And how do we bring people back to the land, because they've mostly been depopulated, basically, either forcefully or unforcefully. And in Scotland, what do you see? I mean, you mentioned tourism a few times. What are the potential ventures? There are potential things in terms of agriculture. What do you see? Is that on the hunting side? Is it actually the agriculture side? Is it grazing? What do you see as a potential for that landscape? Or is that too early?
It is too early, but we've just been brainstorming. But, the brainstorms have included all of those things, as well as thinking about these places as attractors for young people from the city. I mean, it's impossible. The cost of living in cities these days is getting impossible for young people. And these places...
So put a good internet connection and you're good to go, yeah.
Then you're good to go, exactly. And why not live in one of the most beautiful places on the planet? The Flow Country, this landscape I'm talking about, is World Heritage listed in a couple of years. It'll be the world's first peatland World Heritage area. There'll be all sorts of people coming to visit this, so plenty of opportunities to build businesses. But we were also reflecting on, wouldn't it be a nice place to just live and do your telecommuting, do your business if you don't have to be in a high-rise somewhere.
Remote working, they call it, Paul, these days, not telecommuting.
Oh, that's right, sorry.
You get Elon Musk, Starlink, or somebody to set up a ridiculously fast satellite connection and you're good to go. Yeah, you need some good coffee. And what else do you need?
Good coffee is critical, yeah. And of course, whiskey.
And whiskey, yeah.
Which landscape can provide.
That's fascinating. So what have you seen in like the last years? I mean, we talked, it seems centuries ago, but it's only 2.5 years. Like on the landscape level, I mean, these are two new landscapes. I think you were already working in the Republic of Congo, but not, I think, in that corner. What have you seen in the landscapes itself? Are there way more people reaching out that are working in these landscapes to work with you to figure out financing? Are more, I hope so, that more people are discussing, like, let's move beyond grants. We have to find, like, what has been the discussion in the landscape when you visit them? Have they been different from 3 years ago compared to now? Or has it been very similar?
There's been a massive explosion. I mean, we spent 5 years building the lab inside the conservation organisation WWF, and we span out in June, set up a new independent lab based here in Austria.
Of all places, yeah. But I mean, it's a country with 25%, I think, of the agriculture is organic. I mean, you're a lighthouse in certain ways, absolutely, and some stunning landscapes. But you're not working in Austria, I think. You're working mostly elsewhere.
We're talking with some people who might want to develop some landscape in Austria up in the Salzburg Mountains, which would be lovely. But yeah, no, there's been a complete explosion this year, particularly in landscape activity. We're seeing it from the landscapes, but that's been a continuous progression. We're now seeing the investors starting to realize there's business to be made here. And that's partly because of the climate agreement, but also because of Scope 3 and so on, but also because of models that are now starting to come out, business models that are coming out from the garment industry, from the agriculture industry and so on, that are built around landscapes. And so they're seeing financial returns from real investment, not just carbon investment, at landscape scale. And suddenly, I mean, in Glasgow, I had 3 breakfasts one morning with 3 different sets of bankers, each of them building $500 million or $1 billion funds for different things that related to landscape, carbon, regenerative agriculture, and I forgot what the third one was.
We should get them on the show. Yeah. So what has, I mean, beyond carbon, I mean, you call it real investment. So what is an example of real investment? We talked about, I think last time, I think it was IKEA in Slovakia, if I'm not mistaken, and H&M in Bangladesh, and also something in one of the island states that was suffering from sugarcane, and the tourism industry was suffering because of the runoff of agriculture. But for anybody interested in that, listen to the last episode. But what are you seeing, like, in terms of quote unquote real investments? In where do you see, like, something you didn't expect, like, over this year? Like, wow, okay, of course there's a connection there, but I never thought about it.
Yeah, the Fiji one has gone really well. That's
Fiji. It was Fiji. Yeah.
So we've set up an investment incubation company called Matanataki, which is aiming at a $50 million investment into Fiji. They've already got 12 million in. They've purchased some waste dumps, would you believe, and they're turning them into recycling centres, because that's the most urgent poison on the reefs of Fiji.
So it's not the agriculture, but it's the waste runoff, basically. Because just as a bit of context, Fiji realized, and the tourism industry, the hotels, etc., realized that their reefs are dying. And if they die, obviously, their main draw for tourism ends, and people won't come to Fiji anymore, and are working with you to figure out, okay, what are the people on the ground, because you have an amazing team on the ground, or you're working with amazing people on the ground to figure out, okay, was the agriculture runoff from the sugarcane plantations, which I hear in multiple places. I think Mauritius is also trying to do a shout out to Regeneration Mauritius. It's trying to change that as well, because it's from all sides not a profitable business model to grow sugarcane. And of course, also the waste recycling is absolutely crucial, because you're basically bleaching and killing your reefs by what flows into your river. And the circle is so close, is so small when you talk about islands, because it's right there. Like, it's your island, it's everything that happens on the island. That's what influences the reef. Like, you cannot point to a big neighbor or something because it's not there. Like, it's definitely your island that causes many of these things, and hopefully triggers you to do something.
You've got a good memory. Definitely the Oprah effect, I can see.
Sounds like I've listened to the old podcast, but actually I didn't. So I should have done that as preparation. But because it's fascinating, and for sure I've
exactly right.
retold that story a few times. So it's interesting, the waste, and then so 12 million you mentioned, and it's going to fill up to 50, and it's going to target anything that basically damages the reef. Is that what I'm...
That's right. So the team has already reviewed 120 business opportunities. There are 10 that are investment ready now. So they're desperately looking for finance for these. They'd love to get them invested quickly, and and operational. Some of them are organic agriculture, which takes all of the fertilizers and pesticides off the reef. Turmeric.
And sells to the hotel industry, obviously, because Fiji, the last part I forgot to mention, is imports a lot of food, which is, I wouldn't say hilarious, but sort of
crazy
in that distance. Yeah.
They're importing organic avocados and pineapples from Queensland. It's insane. So, but they have a company that's selling turmeric to Walmart and wants to expand their factories, expand to a number of more factories, which would be fantastic to replace sugarcane with that. There's coral reseeding companies, so replanting the corals where they get damaged. There's solar-based energy, floating solar panels that can be used for small villages or hotels, a whole range of things. It's really exciting.
And is 50 million enough? Or what's your...
I expect not. It's growing rapidly. And these guys were invited to present at the General Assembly of the United Nations just 2 months ago. They're really getting some attentions. But they need money, so contact me if you or look up Matanataki if you are an investor. It's really good stuff. In parallel to that, we're waiting for a $30 million investment for the government to create a Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority type arrangement for Fiji that will protect the reefs, manage them, monitor them, and create incentives for businesses and communities to look after them. And that's a nice parallel. Having both of those together makes the system much stronger because it's very costly as a business to monitor your system. If you can have a professional monitoring system that does that, it takes a lot of pressure off and means that you can really focus on impact.
And do you see other island states, like since then, reaching out to you and saying, let's do the same?
Solomon Islands, Indonesia, yeah, and there's a few other possibilities coming as well. So that's really exciting.
Talking about a big island state, Indonesia, yeah, that's a massive one.
Well, actually, going back to your question, what have you seen that surprised you? Indonesia. When we first set up the lab, we worked with Michelin Tire Company and WWF to help design a landscape program for the centre of Sumatra, this little thin ribbon of forest that runs across the centre that has tigers, orangutans, and elephants, one of the only places to get them all together. Michelin wanted to shift their production to be more wildlife friendly, to be actively protecting the rainforest, because they didn't want to be blamed for the destruction of the extinction of tigers in that landscape, for instance. That was initially designed as a public investment program, but it was taken off our hands joyfully because it became a $215 million sustainability bond invested in by BNP Paribas and designed by ADM Capital. We can't take much credit for that, but the model is brilliant. The monitoring framework is very good. Here it's working reasonably well, but that's the sort of thing that's possible with large corporate engagement. So you can do small business like Fiji, or you can work with large corporates to create those sort of systems as well.
Yeah, I will link it below. I heard about the bond. So it's basically Michelin as a company that makes tires, which is interesting that they're protecting tigers because I think Goodyear, their competitor, has a tiger as a logo or something like that. But,
yeah.
And so that's ironic. But they need rubber, obviously. They need a lot of rubber. And so I think they work together with BNP Paribas, like you mentioned, to issue a bond, like a corporate bond for themselves. I mean, a lot of green bonds have been issued. We did an interview, and I'm blanking on the name, with, I think, the Climate Bond Initiative, and I'll put it below as well. Like, there's an incredible amount of money in the debt space, so in the bond space, not necessarily in the equity space as well, but the debt space just dwarfs it by I don't know many times. And the first things around Regen Ag are coming, and restoration. This is Michelin raising 250 million. And there is a lot of low cost capital in the market for these kind of things, and spending it fully on these kind of projects, monitoring it, measuring it, etc. And it's a very cheap way for them to do this. Well, of course, it helps their production gigantically and shields them from a lot of risk, reputational risk, and long-term access to rubber, which I imagine is a commodity that also went up in pricing quite a bit over the last year or so. So that's fascinating. And then it becomes real money, like 250 million. It's not crazy, but it's a serious amount of money. Yeah. And it sets an example. Like, okay, let's structure more of these types of finance where it's so easy for pension funds to be part of that because they always have been doing it. It's not super scary.
Yeah. Well, this year there's already been $350 billion of issuances of green bonds, according to the Climate Bonds Initiative. And what's really changing, I mean, I used to sit on the Standards Committee for CPI, so I watched this very carefully. About 4 years ago, 1% of the total amount would go to land use. Most of it would go to buildings, energy, transport. Now, land use is getting 14% of that amount. So that
14, 1-4. Yeah.
It's a massive growth in the amount of money that's available for land use.
Especially as the green bond space grew, or the climate bond space grew a lot as well. Like this is not just the 14 times, this is much more because the total amount also increased.
Will be much, much larger. That's right. Yeah. So there's all of this money out there looking for good projects. There's very few projects. So let's all get cracking and build a few.
Do you see that as the biggest challenge? Like we need more quote unquote boring projects, boring investments, not boring projects. Projects are very exciting, but boring investments that can easily absorb these kind of amounts.
Yeah. We need super exciting projects that are really boring structurally so that the bankers don't get scared. And that's the challenge with landscape programs is that they have lots of moving parts at the moment. So we're really working to simplify them and create a single product that is a landscape investment vehicle.
And then that investment vehicle like invests in different things, or how would that work? Because there you combine, I mean, what we heard before is carbon and agriculture and aquaculture and recycling. And like, would that all be combined in like a landscape bond or investment vehicle, or would it be cut in pieces so everybody can choose whatever they find more appealing to them?
It depends on the landscape. But if you take the Fiji example, Matanataki is the investment vehicle. They don't hold the money. The money goes straight to the businesses from the investors, but they create the opportunities and make sure it all works because it's very hard to work out what's investable in Fiji. So you can get to scale that way. In the case of Sumatra and the Jambi bond, it was a single vehicle that does multiple things. Other landscapes will design it in different ways. But I think generally there'll be a special purpose vehicle that all the landscape actors get together and design between them, and that holds the money and transfers the funds to the investments or facilitates the flow at least.
Because then it might get tricky because different projects or different investments within the landscape have a different risk profile. I mean, it might also get more interesting because you sort of balance the risk together. But what is the feedback there when you talk to those bankers? Like, let's say you have the breakfast you had last week or 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now. What is your main feedback you give these bankers that are designing the 500 million or $1 billion investment funds for things that touch the landscape? Is there something you can share with them that's like, look, you're maybe approaching it too reductionist, or look, what's your feedback generally to people that want to design something at banks?
We say to them, it's the most exciting journey. Come and join. It works best when the bankers get on the ground with us right from the beginning, in the jungles or the reefs or the peatlands. It's
you must have stories there. Yeah.
Yeah. They're not going to turn that down. But, if they're with us looking at the problem and helping to structure the solutions, then they'll have confidence and understanding in how it works, and the whole thing will be simpler and more effective. Now, this is a new product, so we also say to them, this is not for the faint-hearted. You've got to be prepared to take time, put in some early money for design, which you won't get back, or you can get back later on if you structure that in. But it's still a challenging space. But I think if you're an early leader in this space, it's growing so rapidly that there'll be plenty of benefits down the line.
So time for some shout outs. Who are the leaders in the space? Who should we look at for now?
Commercially, I think some of the multilateral development banks are worth looking at. FMO has... we're working with FMO on the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, which is a $160 million investment fund that invests in 10 landscapes, 35 nature-based solution projects. That's a very interesting model. You've got, the BNP Paribas, who have a portfolio of projects. The United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative has invested with Rabobank and a whole range of other players in agricultural finance. So the Brazil, what's it called? The Agri3. I'll find the name and you can put it in the notes afterwards. But they're doing really, really interesting creative financing. But now what we're seeing is investment houses are coming along that are creating genuinely commercial investments that don't require MDB finance. And, they're really exciting. I had a discussion 2 weeks ago with a Swiss investors who are creating $1 billion regenerative agriculture fund with the aim to create a forward loan for carbon program development that then gets paid back on the carbon money that comes later. And so it'll be commercial, it'll be carbon, and eventually it'll be biodiversity credits coming out of this as well, and targeted for corporates who want to invest and get their money back, but also want to buy carbon and biodiversity credits. That's the sort of thing that's coming down the line, and there'll be many more of these, but that's not unique.
Super, super interesting. And so we're almost at the end of the year. Well, what do you look back to at this year as been the most exciting piece? Maybe the breakfast in COP, maybe something completely different, your trip in Scotland. What has been really surprising, exciting, what you've seen in 2021?
Well, of course, setting up the lab as an independent entity.
Spinning it out. It's a lot of paperwork, I can imagine, as well, and a lot of work to get it out, because you were part of WWF and you're basically a spin-off now of them, right?
Yeah, and we have the most fantastic team, and we're working on 16 landscapes across the planet. I think we worked out that that covers about 85 million hectares, our total portfolio at the moment. Not that we have much of a footprint in some of them, but that's super exciting, and continuing to help to influence this space. We're doing that with a few partners, so we're combining with Common Land and Wetlands International to create a portfolio of landscapes to test out carbon investment at landscape scale. We're working with FAO to test out across their portfolio how you get forest landscape restoration working and financed. We're working with the European Investment Bank to do a similar peatland program with the government of Ireland for 1.4 million hectares in Ireland, and the European Bank for Rural Development, EBRD, in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. What's exciting is that portfolio, those portfolios of landscapes, I think, are amazing. That there's so many organizations who each have 1, 5, 10 landscape programs that can be invested in. And if we can all get a common methodology that allows us to talk to each other and share information and grow these landscapes together, then suddenly you've got a landscape industry. And that feels like it's happening right now, this growth of a landscape industry with billions of dollars that will be available to be invested into it.
After we recorded the episode, I did a bit more research on the green bond of Michelin that we discussed, that was issued by BNP Paribas, and discovered quite a bit of challenges around it and some quite grand accusations of a number of NGOs. So I asked Paul for a comment on that, and this is what he shared.
So there are a whole set of problems that still have to be solved with building landscape programs, Koen. I'm not sure of the details of the Jambi project with Michelin, but there was certainly an allegation by Mighty Earth that they had cleared, their partner, Listari Pacific, had cleared 2,500 hectares of rainforest before this program started. Now, I'm sure that's true, and does that negate the program? I don't think it does. It means, it says that they've changed their practices, and hopefully now with Michelin's commitment to not deforest and not destroy peatlands and so on, that they're now committed to protection, and they have the money to do that. Now, what we're excited about is that that money could have gone into further rainforest destruction. It hasn't. But we have to keep watching it and make sure that it stays the case. Now, that raises another problem, which is that genuine landscape programs are built with all of the stakeholders in the landscape, and they have a steering group, a landscape partnership that guarantees that everyone's happy with how the program proceeds. Now, that's been set up in the case of the Jambi project in Sumatra. How well it's operating, I can't say, but if you have that in place, it makes a big difference. And what you'll find with many landscape programs, or programs that call themselves landscape programs, is that they're a loosely connected set of projects within a landscape. They're not genuinely looking at the entire landscape, looking at how to protect nature, how to support local communities, and how to make money together. They're more just interested in the investment in the individual projects, and they are not really landscape programs. So that's something to watch out for. I think one of the other challenges is getting the upfront design funds. Many landscapes are slowly developing. Investors want to put their money into them, but they're not willing to pay for the cost of building these programs. And that is slow and expensive. But we're seeing some financial instruments coming down the line that do put that early stage investment costs in. I'd like to see a lot more of that, and a lot more investors willing to pay for some of the costs.
Thank you, Paul, so much for that, for sharing the challenges and also the opportunities and the role of early stage capital. And now back to the episode. 2 questions on that. One, what's the role of normal people? This sounds like 100 million here, 250 there. It's a pension fund money, $1 billion in Switzerland. I mean, this doesn't sound like it's accessible for, like you said, the small people with normal size wallets, let's say. What do you see? Is there a role for the crowd or for people in the landscape to partly finance this as well? Like if all these lords in Scotland could participate, I mean, we make the rich a bit richer as well, but many of us actually are suffering probably because their estates haven't been profitable in a long time. They just got interesting subsidies, but as an estate level, take out the subsidies, you'd probably be running on a loss. But what's the role of ordinary, let's say, between bracket investors in this space? Do you see anything exciting there? Are we too early? And is it BNP Paribas issuing this bond for Michelin? And we should be happy. And we definitely should be happy about that.
Yeah, no, there's plenty of role. If you're inside a landscape program, get involved. There's always a place for you. And it's so exciting, in Australia or Fiji or Colombia, there are programs developing in Slovakia. There's always contact the landscape leader and ask to be involved. There'll be a stakeholder group that you can engage with. There'll be lots of studies or promotional activities or things to invest in. So there's every one of these landscapes has a role for the people in them who want to get active. And then there's a role for supporting these landscapes. Invest in landscape. When you see landscape opportunities for investment, invest in them. Crowdfunding. We do need early money to make these things work because they're complicated and they're costly at the beginning. And I hope we're still working it out, but I think there's a role for everyone at different levels in this system.
And the second question, how big, I mean, it really depends obviously on the landscape and the context, is the risk of climate change. How scared are you that things get out of control and the peatlands dry up completely, even though you're planting all these trees high up, so the water is stored in the soil? Like, how much of change can we make quickly enough now to restore and to get the landscapes on an upward slope instead of on a downward slope? Are you still excited about the potential of regeneration, or some landscapes are, I wouldn't say lost, but it's going to be very, very, very difficult to get life back?
I'm hopeful. I mean, the tsunami is coming, and if we're not already building the lifeboats, we're in trouble. But we are. I come from Australia. It's and what's happened with the fires there in the East Coast is horrifying. I used to run around the rainforests in eastern Queensland all the time, and I know 300 rainforest species. I can name 300 rainforest species, but I'm just horrified by how much rainforest has been lost in those fires over the years, which means some species will have disappeared, and the viability of that whole system is really undermined. So we've just recently been approached by a council in north of Sydney who have 1 million hectares. They oversee 1 million hectares. That includes the second highest mountain in Australia. This is Barrington Tops. Big area of rainforest, eucalypt forest with koalas and down to the coast. And we're looking together at how do you take all of these patches of forest and connect them together so that the koalas have got a migratory corridor. As things get hotter, they can go further up the mountains and survive. How do you make sure that the water keeps on flowing through the forest and into the farms? And that's about
through the season. Yeah,
that's about planting in the right times, exactly. And how do you create incentives for everyone to win from this system? Because if you can do it for that council, you can do it for every council up and down the east coast of Australia, and you can maybe fireproof the Australia for the next generation. That's a chance we have to try for, at least. But the ecologists tell us we can do it, and the finance is there, and the willingness from the local council and the local government is there. All of the pieces are there to make this happen.
And what do you see as the role of technology? And we're in this series on technology, and I definitely see technology as a very wide definition. I think financing vehicles are definitely technology as well. But let's zoom a bit deeper into, because I see like satellite companies, monitoring companies popping up, drone companies popping up, I wouldn't say every day, but almost every day. Are you working with any of those? Has that changed in the last 2 years and a half? Like, do you see that central question we try to answer as well, like what to plant, where and why? Are you using mostly, let's say, local indigenous knowledge of people that know the landscape? Are you working with technology there as well to figure out, because it's so big, like 1 million hectares or whatever the size is, like, do you see a role for tech there to help you or the landscape to figure out with different scenarios, with different climate scenarios, etc., okay, what makes sense to do where and why? Because we're running out of time, so we need to be very thoughtful of what to plant or what to make run or walk somewhere.
Yeah, our philosophy is landscapes first. So it's got to work for the landscapes first. They have to decide what's going to be useful for them, and let's first make sure that we're using their knowledge, that that we don't mess up their systems, because that's what works already. But then there's just massive opportunities to add technology onto this. There's it's a bit more than a carbon trading company, a group called Earthbank in Sweden, who are very cool, run by a guy called Tom Duncan, and he used to work for the UNFCCC at a high level, so he knows the climate system very well, and he's designed this bank to pay landowners directly for carbon outcomes, for saving the climate, doing something on their land for saving the climate. He offers a digital monitoring system using the best satellite technology to support them and to verify the actions. And of course, it needs additional verification, but not a lot. And to create a system that can work over very large landscapes and very large areas. So he's investing in 32,000 farmers in Bangladesh, for instance. He's got an investment into Peru, into the rainforests of Peru, and now we're working together to look at how we can get this system to work for all of the landscapes that we're operating in. That excites me because the ability to bring in machine learning and really simplify the system for everyone, so that the money goes direct to the people in the landscapes.
And get it into your pocket through your phone. It wasn't possible 10 years ago, and definitely, you still need a phone, you still need some internet access, but let's say digital money made it, and a lot of these apps made it a lot easier. And then the monitoring, like transparency here. You can figure out which large cocoa trader messed up somewhere or has cacao coming in that comes from a place that hasn't been monitored. And it's also a bit scary because we have these satellites coming over, but definitely it is a very fundamental piece if we want to manage the landscape, because we need to know what's happening and we need to know what's happening in the village. But if the village is the size of the landscape, we need to have different ways of observing, and it's crucial. But I think satellite technology has changed a lot over the last years. It's become much cheaper and much more accessible, and is much faster becoming more accessible. And now even with internet beaming down through satellites, it's becoming interesting as well to, like you said, to live again in a landscape where there's not going to be a fiber optic cable anytime soon, but you can still have a very decent internet connection. So it helps each other, because if there's internet there, of course, you can do a lot more of research locally, upload all the data you need, monitor trees, etc., and or peatlands. Okay, so I'm definitely going to check out Earthbank and put the link below as well.
Oh, they're cool. They're very cool. And the big challenge, so if you can measure these things, then you've got a political challenge of what is it that you're measuring. And we've got a pretty clear idea now on carbon. That's one real achievement out of the climate conferences.
But not on biodiversity. Yeah.
If you ask 10 conservationists how do you measure biodiversity, you'll get 10 answers, 10 completely different answers.
What are you most excited? What do you see there as it's difficult to pick, but is it bioacoustics? Is it like listening to what do you see as a workable model now? I mean, you talked about the Swiss that are building a big fund on carbon and potentially then on biodiversity. What do you now see? Okay, there, or is it still a bit too far away? It's going to be 2-3 years before we figured anything measurable and scalable, so not too costly.
It's got to be sorted out really quickly. And thankfully, Gold Standard, who we've just signed a partnership with, IUCN and WWF are combining forces with a whole range of others to get a clear definition on how you measure biodiversity, hopefully within a year.
Which is super difficult. Oh. Like, we had Satish Kumar on the pod recently, and he very clearly made the point, you cannot measure nature and all its complexity, but still we need to try, while we know that we cannot measure all the complexity. But if we don't measure, it's going to be destroyed. So it's there really interesting tension there. But we need to measure something. We need to measure something, because otherwise it's just not going to happen, unfortunately. Or we get an enormous change in consciousness over Christmas this year, and then we don't need it. But for now, if it doesn't get measured, it gets destroyed or sold.
And, you can measure one thing very easily. That's habitat extent and change. So that's a critical one. You want more natural habitat. Simple as that.
But what is natural habitat? Yeah.
Well, yeah, all right. We won't go into that one. Yeah. There's something really exciting happening on biodiversity, which is the new DNA testing tools. There's a company that I met in Glasgow called Nature Metrics, and there's a few other companies like this who will do water testing. You can send school kids out into a landscape and test the water.
So they get out, that's good, yeah.
€200 a test. You can tell what's in the landscape. You can say, we want to know what fish species are there. We want to know what primate species are there. We want to know what...
By analyzing the water.
Inside those small water samples is all the biodiversity DNA, all the DNA of the biodiversity of that catchment.
And you have to measure it like at the bottom of the catchment, so you capture everything, or it's so diffuse that's fascinating.
Well, they told me a story in Liberia. They were working with Wildlife Conservation Society, and they did a series of samples up rivers to see whether the pygmy hippopotamus was present in those rivers. And they discovered 2 more rivers that had pygmy hippopotamus that people had no idea of. And so they extended the range of the pygmy hippopotamus. But you can use this for testing diversity in a forest, for instance. If you're regenerating the forest, you can test how many tree species there are, or how many bird species come there.
And on the water, and actually I've heard people say, like, the best way to, I don't remember if it was Joel Salatin or somebody else, like or maybe Mark Shepard, the easiest way to test if a farm is going the right direction is to go to the lowest point and capture some of the water. That if it rains too much, there's some runoff. I mean, not always, but usually, or capture the water that flows through the area. Have that analyzed, because you can see all the chemicals, you can see all the life, and apparently you can see all the DNA, meaning you can see if the soil life is going up or down, or if it's increasing. And water is very easy between brackets to do, because it flows down. Yeah, it's a much easier connection than the carbon piece or the air piece, etc. Because it moves in one direction, and that's fascinating.
So you think for our Australian landscape, this Barrington Coast landscape, you just have to do a few tests along the river valleys to find out where the koalas are, and then do that every year, and we can test whether the koalas have moved to different habitats. And it costs next to nothing in the scale of an overall investment in biodiversity.
And if you're doing it anyway, you can get an amount of data from what is happening in that landscape. If you measure like at the end of the river when it comes into the ocean, you can measure anything that happens. And you just slowly go up and basically figure out, okay, this is where there's still a farmer doing XYZ, or this is a logging company, or this is because, you can see that. That's very interesting. I didn't know you can see koalas or wildlife in the water.
Yeah.
The DNA of it. Anyway, I have a whole list of new interviews I need to do now. Thank you.
So, I've had a few bankers come to me and say that they want to give their clients want to give biodiversity credits. They want to give payments to people for improving biodiversity. So, if we can measure it as simply as that, then you can add money. You can add a payment for it. Would be lovely, wouldn't it?
We still have to calculate the value of a koala, but that's obviously going to be a lot because they're so cute.
Yeah, I've got no idea how this is going to work.
Either. You're from Australia.
Again, we're making it up as we're building the plane as we fly.
Thank you so much, Paul. I want to be conscious of your time. I know it's not the last time we're going to be chatting. Hopefully it's not going to take 2.5 years and another pandemic, which felt like 10 years, to be checking in because so much seems to be happening with 85 million hectares and 16 landscapes. That's quite a growth curve and some very excited ones. So thank you so much for your work you're doing and for your time today to come on the podcast and share the progress.
Well, and thank you, Koen, for being the Oprah of the regenerative agriculture.
This is going to be a thing now, huh? Yeah. Thank you, Marcus. Yeah.
Finance world. This is going to stick, I think. But you really are at the center of. I think you're very useful and your program is very useful to so many of us to inspire us and to connect us and to give us some brilliant examples. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, if you download the episode in advance, you can even listen to it in a very remote landscape because you don't need a live internet connection. So thank you so much, Paul. Have a great day, and we'll be checking in soon, I hope.
Cheers.
If you found the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast valuable, there are a few simple ways you can use to support it. Number 1, rate and review the podcast on your podcast app. That's the best way for other listeners to find the podcast, and it only takes a few seconds. Number 2, share this podcast on social media or email it to your friends and colleagues. Number 3, if this podcast has been of value to you and if you have the means, please join my membership community to help grow this platform and allow me to take it further. You can find all the details on gumroad.com/investingregenag or in the description below. Thank you so much and see you at the next podcast.